Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Let's talk Daniel DuBois, and let's talk generations. Now, I can tell you in the 1980s, when I was a much younger guy, there were a bunch of established fighters. It was the end of, we'll call it, the Larry Holmes era, right? Holmes had ruled the roost for some time. There were a bunch of guys from Larry's era who were still around, right? Jerry Cooney fought Michael Spinks. You understood. Both Cooney and Spinks went back years. Spinks, of course, was the light heavyweight king. You had a bunch of other guys out there. Tony Tucker, Buster Douglas, names like that. And along comes a young guy from my generation, right? Early 20s. It's a paradigm shift. You knew that Mike Tyson was different than the other guys. Mike Tyson was the representative of my age group. We flocked to him. I want folks to think in terms of generations. Now, let's say investor Jim Rogers is right. He claims the world changes every 15 years, right? I know 15 sounds a little short to call a generation, but I like to think of generations, at least when it comes to investing, as 15 years. In sports, which is accelerated, we'll call a generation every 7.5 years, half of 15. Right? What that means is when a young guy, Teofimo Lopez, for example, when a young guy emerges and there's an old guard. And what do I mean by an old guard? I mean Deontay Wilder, 33 years old. Tyson Fury, 30 years old. Andy Ruiz, 29 years old. When there are a bunch of elite fighters all clustered together, age-wise, right? And even the guys around them are close in age. Anthony Joshua, Joseph Parker, Dylan White. When that's the top of a heavyweight division, and along comes a guy who's 21 years old, 7.5 years younger, at least, right, than Deontay Wilder, for example. When a Daniel DuBois shows up, I think he's going to be 22 for his next fight, right? When he shows up, he has a built-in constituency. You're watching boxing, and guess what? He is the representative of the people who are in their very early 20s, right? It's a paradigm shift. You're looking at him and you're thinking, you know what? This guy's untainted, untouched by 2016, the last Olympic Games, 2015, 2014. What you knew before doesn't stick to this guy because this guy is new. It's a new generation. Where is he going to take it? Now, I'm just telling you that when you see a Tyson or a DuBois, right, someone who steps out and is younger than everyone else. Canelo, if you remember when Canelo first came up, understand that this guy, because he has the built-in constituency, because we're looking at him and saying, is he the next big thing in boxing? Right? He hasn't been around long enough to have had those tough fights that hurt legacy. Right? All we know is this guy is at takeoff. Right? He's the plane you see running down the runway about to take off at the airport. You sense the excitement. He's a knockout puncher. Guys are finishing fights on the canvas. Unbeaten. Nothing but success on the resume. When you see this kind of fighter, right? As Ali put it when he beat Liston for the title, he said, "Look at me, I'm as pretty as a girl." He says, "I'm 22 years old." You understood. This was a new day. When you have a new day fighter, my advice to that fighter is to not wait in line. Daniel Dubois loves to be on his front foot. Let's critique his style here for a bit. Let's nitpick, right? He's in the public eye. He's someone gamblers are gambling on, right? We picked him in his last fight, right? He's in our field of vision. Let's break him down a little bit. Front foot heavy, right? You get the feeling that if he's fighting an Andy Ruiz, and let's be clear here, Andy at 29 has faster hands than Daniel Dubois, right? Some guys are just gifted with hand speed. Andy Ruiz is gifted with hand speed. Andy's a combination puncher. Andy is going to collapse the pocket. Dubois is front foot. Ruiz is front foot. No, I'm not saying that Andy wins that fight. The way I'd play that fight is I would bet on a stoppage, one way or the other, right? Fight doesn't go the distance. But you look at Dubois and you realize, okay, this guy in the gym needs to work on a back foot game, right? You look at him, you notice he has an excellent jab, but you notice he doesn't throw it that much. His own corner in the Nathan Gorman fight was a little bit upset with him. Upset's a strong word, we'll say concerned. They told him, hey, look, don't go for the knockout. Box this guy, right? Because they know with that level of jab after the start to the fight that Dubois had, right? Gorman's in trouble early. Right after the start to the fight that Dubois had, the corner understood with this jab, we don't want our young fighter punching himself out. He's off to a fast start, coast a bit. Make the fight more about Gorman having to get past the jab, having to find a way to win rounds, having to try to come back, take the win. You have boxing skills. Let's face it, Dubois doesn't have confidence in his jab at this point in his career. Doesn't know how to fight slow. In other words, you come out, you're fighting Gorman, you knock him down, right? Most people in the arena are thinking, well, you're winning the rounds. It's a 12-round fight, a distance at which Dubois doesn't have a lot of experience. You would think Dubois would know how to switch off and coast for a few rounds, right? Every round can't be a shootout. Dubois has to work on pacing, doesn't he? Right? Gorman also relatively stationary. These two guys were sparring partners. I was watching the fight and I thought, okay, Gorman, big talker before the fight, Gorman had sparred with Dubois, and I was wondering, okay, what's Gorman's secret here that we don't know about to hurt Dubois? And from this seat, it looked like Gorman thought that he could duck his head and hit Dubois with a left hook as Dubois came inside. Right? Didn't work out so well for him. I didn't see Gorman's left hook land with authority. But understand, the whole premise of the duck your head and have him walk into a left hook is that you knew that Dubois was going to be coming forward. Well, it actually did get scary in the fight. Dubois wins the fight. There's no confusion about that. Dubois was dominating in the fight. No confusion about that. It's not a lucky stoppage. Gorman's hurt in different rounds. No doubt about that. But there is a little sequence in this fight where Gorman plans and lands a couple of excellent uppercuts. In other words, DuBois needs to, again, work on winning slow rounds. In other words, you're up big. You understand Gorman needs to hit you with something big to get back into the fight. What are you doing? Collapsing the pocket when you have a great jab. Right? Even great fighters like Lennox Lewis, guy with a punch. If he jumped out on you and he had the fight in control, he's going to bank some rounds. He's going to hit you in the face with a jab. George Foreman, great jab. Right? Sonny Liston. These guys understood that they don't have to be crashing the pocket every round. They could be leaning back, hitting you with the jab. Now that's another thing. As I said in the pre-fight video, DuBois leans forward. You notice that, right? He doesn't really have a mobile center of gravity. He's the opposite of the great fighter who just passed, Pernell Whitaker, right? DuBois, in a perfect world, right? As his career continues, privacy of his gym with his training team is going to have to figure out how to stay away, win rounds behind a jab, right? That's all part of pacing. You jump out, you have a great start like he did against Gorman. In rounds 4, 5, and 6, rather than be close enough to be getting hit with uppercuts, shouldn't you dictate distance, bank some rounds, make it even more of a desperate situation for your opponent? Your opponent's already lost the early rounds. And, of course, shouldn't you, if you have a great jab, be able to throw it leaning backwards? Right? You're 6'5". Use your height. What's the harm in that? Especially when you're ahead in the fight. Especially when you have a great jab. Don't you want to lean back, have that jab be a point of separation between you and your opponent, and make it so that the only punches your opponent can hit you with would have to be, straight rights or punches that have to travel a distance, not an uppercut. So, DuBois has things to work on. Let me say this too. Up top, DuBois needs a little bit of space, right? He throws hooks, but they have a little bit of distance between them. You notice he comes in, crouched over, and he wants you arm's length away, right? That opens the door. That opens the door for a Bernard Hopkins type fighter to say, you know what, up top, I'm not going to give him the space. So then DuBois down low is excellent at throwing hooks. He doesn't need a lot of space for that. And he's heavy-handed. Right? So understand, a guy who can dodge DuBois' jab, which DuBois doesn't throw enough, who can also protect his body inside, who can get DuBois to turn, right? Because DuBois looks a little robotic. He needs to plant his feet. Might have some success against DuBois. But here's the catch. A mistake I see a lot of fighters make is they decide to develop those skills before they fight the Deontay Wilders of the world, right? The guys with the WBC belt or, whatever belt that the guy has. That would be a mistake. That would be a mistake. If I'm DuBois, and I know this sounds crazy, while I'm working on those skills in the background, being more fluid, using my jab more, right? Figuring out how to change my center of gravity at times so I'm not leaning forward all the time, right? While I'm working on those skills, using my body to dodge punches, right? Not catching everything on my hands, having the ability perhaps to even drop my hands at times, because fighters know keeping your hands up drains your stamina. While I'm working on all of that in the gym between fights, right? Living a fighter's lifestyle. In other words, not waiting until I sign a fight and then deciding, oh, let me get in shape to fight this guy in 90 days. No, keeping my weight within a certain range, eating right, having a daily protocol where I'm going to the gym at a certain time, I'm doing a certain amount of work, right? I'm doing film study, I'm sparring against guys, I'm leaving gym a certain amount of time. I'm not at the pub late at night with my friends getting hammered, right? I'm not saying I'm a teetotaler, but I have a limit on the drinks. I don't do foolish things like smoke, right? I have a protocol, so if I'm someplace and, people are smoking weed or whatever and it's in the air, I get up and I leave, right? If DuBois lives a fighter's lifestyle and works on his game in the background, great. But I'm just saying, because we're in an era of specialists, because if you fight Andy Ruiz, he's going to be on his front foot, right? He's going to meet you in the middle of the ring. It's going to be a shootout and you have a punch. Because if you fight Deontay Wilder, another heavyweight champ, he's going to be trying to land a straight right hand on you. You know what he's going to do. You're not going to run into a situation where a specialist like Deontay Wilder is going to make you pay for the defects in your style right now. And because you're young, with the built-in constituency, the people your age who are with you because you're their representative right now in the sport of boxing, understand, that only lasts for a short period of time, right? Over time, after Mike Tyson arrived in the 1980s, and everyone who was young said, hey, we're with Mike. We're not with Trevor Burbeck. We're not with Pinklin Thomas, right? Larry was my dad's fighter or my older brother's fighter. We're with Mike. He's our age. He's our guy. Understand, once Tyson gets to his mid-20s, other guys emerge from that generation, right? Riddick Bowe. Smoking Burt Cooper, if you remember the era, right? Well, let me just say this. DuBois right now has a jump on every heavyweight in his early 20s, right? If we had a crown by age group for 21, 22-year-olds, Daniel DuBois is that age group's heavyweight champion. Folks, that's marketable, right? When a guy hasn't been hit by bullets yet because he hasn't been in that many gunfights, and when the few gunfights he's been in have ended definitively, like this fight against Gorman, right? That's marketing power. So I know there are fighters who say, hey, I need to improve my game in the gym. When you're in an era of specialists, when you don't have much of a back foot game, Andy Ruiz doesn't have much of a back foot game. If you're given a shot at Ruiz's title, if you're given a shot at Deontay Wilder's title, you need to take it. The fighters to avoid, let's be real here, right, are the fighters who have been in the gym so long and who aren't specialists. Right? The fighters with different fight styles. I keep mentioning this guy's name, Alexander Usyk. Another guy you don't want to deal with, right? I know a lot of people in the UK disagree with me, but Joseph Parker, understand, the only man to beat Andy Ruiz, has a back foot game, can hit hard. We don't know what would have happened in his fight against Anthony Joshua if the referee had allowed the men to fight inside. Right? We just don't know. So, my point to Daniel Dubois is cherry pick your opponents based on their status. Right? If Deontay Wilder's people call and say, hey, we want to fight you, let's say the fight with Tyson Fury doesn't happen for whatever reason. Right? Let's say Wilder gets by Luis Ortiz and has an opening. Right? In my opinion, you have to take that fight. Let's go further. Tyson Fury. Now, Fury's interesting because Fury has the developed game. But Fury, in his comeback, hasn't fully shown it to us. In other words, the Fury who beats Vladimir Klitschko. I'm a big Fury fan, but I haven't seen that Fury yet. In other words, obviously he had more mobility and better back foot skills than Deontay Wilder. Right? But let's face it, he knew Wilder really is a one-handed fighter. Fury's last fight was Tom Schwartz. Now, what you haven't seen is the Fury who used to collapse the pocket against, let's say, a Derek Chisora or a Steve Cunningham. Right? In any event, if I'm 22 years old and I'm British and the lineal heavyweight champion who happens to be British, I understand Fury's a traveler, right? Who happens to be from the UK, right? That orbit, wants to fight me. That fight is too big to pass up. Let's remember, it's prize fighting. If you get offered a big enough prize, I believe you have to take that fight simply because the sport is too dangerous. If you don't take the payday, you might never get that payday back. Just think about the payday that Joshua and Wilder would have received had the two of them fought. Right? We can blame one or the other for that fight not happening. Folks, for them to generate that level of payday again by fighting each other, a lot of things are going to happen now. Right? If you're Daniel Dubois and the Tyson Fury people come to you, right, whether or not you think you have the back foot game, right, whether or not you feel confident throwing your jab, and you'd have to because Fury is going to play games with distance, right, spacing between the two fighters. Whether you're ready or not, if you're Daniel Dubois, you need to take that fight. Think about Saul Alvarez for a moment. Right? Saul Alvarez clearly, in hindsight, was not ready to fight Floyd Mayweather. Let's just be real. As I said, I watched the first 6 rounds of that fight. My scorecard had Mayweather up 6-0. You want to know what saved Canelo in that fight? Mayweather had problems with his hands. When I say saved Canelo, I just mean allowed Canelo to go the distance in that fight. Canelo didn't have the speed to deal with Mayweather, etc. But understand, Canelo's older now. And the Mayweather fight's actually a feather in Canelo's cap. We look at that fight and we say, oh, well, Canelo, as a young man, was willing to fight the very best. It's actually noteworthy when you look at Canelo's record and you see the loss. And then you find out that the loss was to Floyd Mayweather. You say, oh, wow, Canelo fought Mayweather. This is a guy fighting the best. If I'm Daniel Dubois and I get a phone call and it's Tyson Fury, I'd override my corner. If the numbers are right, if they aren't going to treat me like I'm a minimum wage, slave. If they say, hey, we're offering you, and I count the zeros and the numbers in the millions, I take that fight. Because understand, Dubois is a puncher, right? Big time hooker. I'll agree. He doesn't throw a long left hand. I'll agree with that. But I will say this. His left hook, and I believe that's his big punch. His left hook is one of the best in boxing today. Right? So, to sum up here, a new generation has arrived in the heavyweight division. The 21, 22-year-olds are now in the building. Right? The Lions are at the gate. Daniel Dubois has entered the premises. My advice to Dubois, if you get a call from Wilder, Fury, or Ruiz, take the call. Right? If they offer you enough money, make the fight. But in the background, you need to be working on throwing your jab more. Right? It's very telling. That Ricky Hatton at the end of the first round is talking to his fighter, Nathan Gorman, a guy with familiarity with Dubois. And Hatton is urging his fighter to throw 4, 5, 6 punches in a row to open up. Right? The feeling is that Dubois is too robotic and wouldn't be able to handle a lot of combination punching. Now, when you're 6'5", 6'4.5", 6'5", you can actually deal with combination punchers by keeping them outside, right? If you have a great jab and you have great timing and you know how to lean your body, again, look at Vladimir Klitschko films, look at Vitaly Klitschko films. If you know how to lean your body and hide your upper body behind a jab, that would help Dubois deal with a combination puncher. Now, Gorman never is able to get off great combinations against Dubois, right? But just know, a guy who sparred with Dubois thought that that was a viable strategy. If I'm Dubois in the background, those are the things I work on. But I would also keep a short list of calls I'm not going to take. Right? If Alexander Usyk calls me up, I'm not taking that call. Right? You don't want to deal with a cagey veteran who has gone through his own development and who has already shored up weaknesses in his game. Right? If Tony Bellew decides, hey, I want to come back in boxing and I'm British, this would sell a lot of tickets. This would, pay for my kids' college meals. I want to fight Daniel Dubois. If I'm Dubois, I don't take that call. Tony is exactly the kind of cagey veteran that a guy with some holes in his game right now, right? Absence of a back foot and stuff like that, should not fight. Right? Food for thought. So Dubois is serious competition. If he's offered a title shot with the right amount of money, I take that. I don't see how fighting Floyd Mayweather hurt Canelo. Not only that, Canelo in interviews has said that he learned a lot from that fight. Right? If you're getting compensated for the risk and you know you have one punch KO capability, right? If he gets lucky, he gets the title, he gets the glory. We don't even notice the holes in his game. Let me say this. Mike Tyson, great fighter, one of my all-time favorites. One of the few times in history that we've had a heavyweight champion where everyone in the building knew who the heavyweight champion was. Where you started asking yourself questions like, wow, is this guy the best ever? How would he do against the Holy Grail? Right? Lewis, Ali. But you noticed that Tyson didn't develop certain skills. By the time he fights Buster Douglas, he couldn't slip Douglas's jab, could he? When he fought Evander Holyfield, now those are the most fascinating fights in the Tyson saga for me personally, right? You notice that if an opponent was willing to get his head right under Tyson's chin and to force Tyson onto his back foot, remove Tyson's suddenness by hunting Tyson, turning Tyson into the hunted, you notice that Tyson didn't quite know what to do, right? Before holes in DuBois' game like that are discovered, I hope this guy takes a swing at the top shelf of the division, right? It's my understanding that Andy Ruiz and Anthony Joshua, who they claim DuBois knocked down in sparring, right? It's my understanding those guys are having a hard time agreeing on the terms of a rematch, right? I'm just telling you a lot could go wrong on the way to Wilder Fury, right? Wilder has a very tough match coming up with Luis Ortiz. I'll agree, Luis Ortiz is older. I'll agree, Luis Ortiz, stamina-wise, if that fight gets to the 9th, 10th rounds, might have some problems. I'll agree. But I don't think it's a done deal that Wilder beats Ortiz. Right? I don't. And I understand Wilder has had big-time success in big rematches, right? The Bermain Stavern rematch. So if an opening ever appears, right? Because understand, the old guard needs to get to the young guard before the young guard figures out the sport. The best move Mike McCallum, the body snatcher, ever made in his career was fighting Julian Jackson before Julian Jackson figured out the lay of the land. One of the best moves Floyd Mayweather ever did in his career was fighting Canelo before Canelo became the Canelo we know now, right? The Canelo who has his upper body on a swivel and who has Danny Jacobs missing left and right, right? Jacobs is missing out of a right hand stance. Jacobs is missing out of a left hand stance. That Canelo did not exist at the time Floyd Mayweather fought him. Right? If you're the old guard, you're thinking, I've got to nip this in the bud. Right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I remember seeing a champ take on a young Felix Trinidad when Trinidad was barely in his 20s, because Trinidad up to that point had been a monster. And of course, that guy found out the hard way, as did Trevor Burbank when he fought Mike Tyson, that punching power at a young age is still punching power, right? If I'm DuBois, if the offer is big enough from someone with a belt, I take it. But if a KG vet calls me up, right? If I look on caller ID and I see Usyk's name or I see Bellu's name, I don't take that call until I've figured out how to hit guys up top, up close. How I figure out how to win slow rounds. Understand, it's disconcerting after the Lardy fight, where DuBois got lured into a shootout. For him in this fight, after a fast start, to be close enough to Gorman to get hit with uppercuts, to be in a bit of a shootout here, right? He needs to figure out the pacing a little bit better. let me let everyone in on a secret too. DuBois' jab is so good that I'm surprised he's not opening the fight with the jab. I lived through the Larry Holmes era. I can tell you the fight did not start until you figured out a way to get by Larry's jab. So you'd be watching Larry Holmes fights and he'd be up 5 rounds to 1. And of course, he had entered the ring wearing the belt. So you understood his opponent was through unless his opponent got reckless, right? And that's when the Jerry Cooneys of the world ended up getting stopped by Larry Holmes in the later rounds. DuBois has, in my opinion, a jab that could develop into a Larry Holmes jab. Notice that Errol Spence, still the most surprising fight I've seen this year, Errol Spence, Mikey Garcia. Notice that Errol Spence opens his fight against Mikey Garcia, a guy who didn't have Spence's experience at 147, who's smaller than Spence. Errol Spence opens that fight with his jab. By the way, the Spence performance for me personally is still the performance of the year, right? Spence opens that fight with his jab, builds up a big lead. Mikey has to start getting desperate. You wouldn't even have known that Spence is a big puncher, a finisher, looking at the first third of that fight, right? It might take DuBois some time to get confidence in his jab to open that way. But in my opinion, that shouldn't stop him from accepting an offer to fight for the title against Ruiz, against Wilder, or against Fury. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this video. Thanks for stopping by.